Lauren, the returns are finally out in the public domain. What are you seeing in them?
Yeah, and there's a couple key takeaways, one of which we had an indication of given that the Joint Committee on Taxation put out a report last week. But we have now been able to verify with the underlying documents that Donald Trump paid very little in taxes in some of the first years of his presidency. In fact, in 2016 and 2017, just $750 each of those years in federal income taxes. Then in 2018 and 2019, a bit more, nearly more than $1 million in federal income taxes, and then nothing in 2020, the last year of his presidency, Abby, and that he often used projecting losses forward as a way to reduce his tax bill. We also are learning a couple of other interesting pieces of information. One of them, just questions, and this was raised again by the Joint Committee on Taxation's report last week about how Trump used his tax process and tax paying process to potentially avoid paying taxes. One of the questions that was raised by the Joint Committee on Taxation is that he got a large amount of interest from loans that he said he had given to his children. And at some points that interest may have been even more than what the market value at the time was. And that has raised some questions for the JCT. And it raised some questions for an accountant that was looking over these that CNN spoke with as well. And I think that that's interesting. That's something potentially further down the line that potentially auditors or other accountants could look more deeply at. The other question that was raised is, in one instance in the Aerospace LLC, because remember these tax returns included some business entities, he claimed that he had made $42,965 in profit. Then on the same tax return in the same year claimed that he had in expenses $42,965. The same accountant that CNN talked to said that it would be almost statistically impossible for those two numbers to be the exact same. But if you have those two numbers in your tax returns, then your tax bill is reduced, right? So that is another thing that potentially could be looked at. There are so many pages of documents, Abby, here. It's going to take a long time to pour over all this information, but those are just some initial findings. Obviously, Republicans will take control of the House of Representatives in just a matter of days. This was really one of the last moments Democrats could take in this step to release these returns. Abby?
All right, Lauren Fox, thank you so much for that. And let's now bring in our tax expert, Ed McCafferty, and David Cay Johnston, the author of It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America, and also CNN political commentator and former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania, Charlie Dent. Ed, I want to start with you because Trump has tried to keep these taxes hidden for many years. What do you see in there that perhaps explains why this is an issue that, by all accounts, is something that he is very sensitive about and has been since he was running for president?
Sure. And I think the good news of this time of year is maybe this is the last time we'll have to be talking about Trump tax returns, which I'm sure you'll be happy about, and other cable news anchors might be happy about. A lot of detail in what we saw today. But I think the big picture is we've already known it. We've known it from New York Times reporting. We've known it from the reporting of David Cay Johnston, who you're going to hear from in a minute. Trump is a very bad businessman. He loses money. He lost money from the casinos to the golf clubs with vodka and university and Trump stakes in between. He loses money. He pays no taxes, mainly because he loses money. He sometimes makes money, like when he's a reality TV show star. But for the most part, this is a man he's a poor businessman. He loses other people's money. He generates losses from that. He pays no taxes. Like a lot of American billionaires, he pays no taxes. We learned that the IRS did nothing really serious to question or challenge or even do the mandatory audits. So I think we don't necessarily see anything new, but I think it's the dog that's not barking, the taxes that are not paid, the IRS investigations that are not pursued. And it's characteristic, I think, of a tax system that's broken and an IRS that's not up to the task of auditing the wealthiest Americans.
And to that point, a lot of what is in here is legal. People may not like it, but it's legal. But I do want to ask you about some points that Lauren just raised. There were some big question marks. These loans to his children and the interest that he received, expenses that equaled the exact same amount as the profit that he filed. Are those red flags to you?
Oh, sure. I mean, there are plenty of red flags, and we now know from the Manhattan DA investigation, they were able to get a criminal conviction of the Trump organization for tax fraud. That's pretty rare. It's hard to get a criminal conviction for tax fraud. So, like his father, Fred, Trump consistently pushes against the line of propriety and often goes over it. There are many, many more things than the few details your reporter mentioned: overvalued conservation easements, writing off personal expenses as business expenses, putting the kids on the payroll. Donald Trump himself was on Fred Trump's payroll. He was an executive in his father's company when he was 9 years old. So this game has been going on for decades. It's pretty standard, if crude, tax avoidance. And Trump often takes it over the line. And then, of course, there's no accountability because it doesn't look like he's ever really audited, even when there's an IRS rule that says he's supposed to be audited.
Right,
which
he was
is
not.
What happened when he was president.
He was not audited for those first 2 years that he was president. David, to you, this morning Trump responded saying that these returns show how, quote, proudly successful he has been. What do you think that they show?
Oh, they don't show he's successful at all. They clearly show that he took advantage of every lawful method of tax avoidance, including ones he lobbied Congress for in 1992, successfully lobbied them for, that were enormously beneficial to him. But they also show, at a minimum, 26 examples of where Donald crossed the line and engaged in what I believe can be prosecuted as criminal tax fraud. Donald in 1984 filed tax returns that showed a business with zero revenue and $600,000 of expenses. Both the city of New York and the state of New York, after trials Donald demanded, the judges held these were civil tax fraud. Well, that put him on notice. He can't do that. He did it 26 times over the 6 years. And that is powerful evidence of criminal intent. He knew you shouldn't do it. He did it anyway. And why did he get away with it? Well, being in control of the federal government, he blocked the turning over of his tax returns. He blocked the audits that are required by law. And for years, he didn't receive any serious attention from the IRS auditors.
Charlie, over to you on the political end of this. Trump himself, when he ran for president, he was the first president since Jimmy Carter to not release his tax returns back in 2016. But Republicans, including the soon-to-be chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Kevin Brady, say that this is going to create a new precedent. He says that it would allow for the release of tax returns of private citizens, political enemies, businesses, and labor leaders, and even, he says, Supreme Court justices. Do you think that this is really a new precedent for all of those other people, or just for people running for president who in the past have already released their tax returns?
Well, let me say I agree with what David and Ed have said about Donald Trump's tax avoidance schemes that are really reprehensible and maybe criminal. I don't know. But I also agree with Kevin Brady. Look, if Congress wants to pass a law to say that a presidential candidate must release his or her tax returns and pass a law to do so, yes, Donald Trump violated the norms and the traditions of releasing the tax returns. That's his right. Now, I don't agree with it, but that was his right. But I do fear that they may be weaponizing the release of tax returns with this action. And I have a lot of respect for Chairman Neal. But look, I could see the Republicans turning around and saying, well, hey, how about Sam Bankman-Fried? Wouldn't we all like to know what he paid in tax after what he just did? And I can see Republicans say, how about Hunter Biden and his business dealings? Shouldn't we be able to see that? What's the legislative purpose to all this? The point is, with Trump's tax returns, I mean, I don't know that by revealing this to the public the way they did, that we're learning anything that the authorities didn't already know. So again, I think this is a precedent, and I believe that this will be weaponized going forward.
But Charlie, just to push back on that a little bit, I mean, Hunter Biden isn't running for president. Isn't there a different standard for presidents than there is for the son of the president, for example?
But Congress should pass a law then to say that a presidential candidate or a president must release his or her tax returns. Pass the law to do it. Just because Trump violated the norm, he didn't violate the law in that case. Now, he may have done all the other things he did. And I'm not a defender of Donald Trump on most things. I've been very critical of him over the years. But I do have an issue. What was the legislative purpose of this? That's why the committee went to the IRS and they said, oh, this is all for a legislative purpose. I'm not sure I've seen that legislative purpose. Yeah. They can reform the presidential audit process without releasing the tax return. I mean, the bill they just passed, they didn't have to release the return to do that. So I'm really questioning why he did it.